Security, remove him. He's making our guests uncomfortable. The sentence didn't echo. It sliced, sharp and deliberate, across the polished marble lobby of the Harrington Grand, a five-star hotel where a single night cost more than most people's monthly rent. Conversations stalled mid-sentence. Glasses hovered inches from lips. Even the soft jazz drifting from hidden speakers seemed to pause, as if the room itself was holding its breath. And at the center of it all stood Malik Harrington, 6 feet tall, dressed in a plain black t-shirt, dark denim, and clean white sneakers, looking nothing like the image of wealth the room had been trained to respect. He didn't move. He didn't argue. He just stood there, calm, composed, like a man who had seen this moment before and already knew how it would end. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to Malik. The woman who had spoken, Claire Whitman, general manager, stood near the front desk with her arms crossed, posture rigid, chin slightly raised as if authority lived in the angle of her stance. Her blonde hair was pulled tight into a low bun, her tailored navy suit pressed to perfection, every detail designed to signal control. But her eyes gave something else away. Not just suspicion, certainty, the kind that didn't need proof. The kind that had already made its decision the moment Malik walked through the glass doors 12 minutes earlier. He had entered quietly, unnoticed at first, his reflection briefly catching in the towering glass panels that framed the lobby like a display case of curated luxury. Crystal chandeliers hung above, dripping light across polished stone floors that reflected every movement with mirror-like precision. Guests in tailored suits and designer dresses moved through the space with practiced ease, the kind that came from knowing they belonged. And then there was Malik. No watch flashing under the lights. No branded luggage trailing behind him. No assistant whispering in his ear. Just a man walking in alone. Intentional. Measured. Invisible. Until he wasn't. It started with a glance. Then a second. A quiet exchange between 2 front desk staff. A subtle shift in posture. Shoulders tightening. Eyes narrowing. The kind of silent communication that didn't need words. Because it had been practiced too many times before. "Can I help you?" one of them had asked, voice polite but guarded, the kind of politeness that felt like a question mark. Malik had nodded once. Reservation under Harrington. He didn't say more. He didn't need to. But the name didn't land the way it should have. Not here. Not on him. Fingers hovered over the keyboard. Eyes flicked up again. Down again. A pause just long enough to grow uncomfortable. And then came the whisper. "Check again." One employee murmured to the other, low enough to almost disappear, but not quite. Malik heard it. He always did. Across the lobby, a woman seated near the bar, mid-30s, phone already half-raised, noticed the shift too. She didn't know why yet, but something felt off. The energy had changed. The air, once smooth and predictable, now carried tension like static before a storm. And storms, in places like this, didn't happen by accident. They were built. One assumption at a time. Claire Whitman stepped in shortly after, heels clicking sharply against the marble, each step echoing with authority. She didn't look at the screen first. She looked at him. That was her first mistake. Her eyes moved over him quickly, taking inventory in seconds, clothes, posture, presence, then settling into something final. Decision made. "I'm sorry," she said, her tone already shifting from service to control. "But we don't have a reservation under that name." Malik didn't react. Not externally. Inside, something older stirred. Not anger. Not yet. Recognition. He had heard versions of this before. At 22, when a real estate office told him he wasn't quite the right fit despite his top scores. At 29, when a lender questioned his assets twice as hard as anyone else in the room. At 35, when his first hotel acquisition was nearly blocked because someone couldn't reconcile his face with the numbers on paper. Different places. Same pattern. And now here. He tilted his head slightly. Run it again. Not louder. Not sharper. Just certain. Claire's lips pressed into a thin line. "Sir, I already did." There it was. The shift from guest to sir. Formal. Distant. Dismissive. Around them, the lobby had begun to notice. Conversations lowered. Eyes drifted. A man in a gray suit paused mid-step, pretending to check his watch while clearly watching the exchange. The woman by the bar lifted her phone a little higher, thumb hovering over record. Something told her this wasn't going to stay small. Malik stood still, hands relaxed at his sides. He wasn't in a hurry. He never was. Time, after all, had always been on his side. Then try the executive system, he said calmly. Claire let out a soft, almost imperceptible laugh, the kind people use when they've already decided how a story ends. We don't just access executive records without proper verification. The words sounded procedural, official, but underneath them sat something else. A barrier. Invisible. Intentional. And then came the glance toward security. Subtle. Quick. But enough. Two men near the entrance shifted slightly, their posture changing from passive presence to quiet readiness. The signal had been sent. The woman by the bar hit record. Across the room, a young employee, maybe early 20s, still knew enough to question things. Watched the interaction unfold with growing unease. She glanced at the screen behind the desk. The name Harrington was there. Clear as day. Tagged. Highlighted. Something wasn't adding up. Malik noticed her hesitation. The flicker of doubt. The moment before someone decides whether to speak or stay silent. He had seen that look too. Many times. There it is, he said softly, nodding toward the screen. Claire didn't turn. She didn't need to. Because turning would mean checking. And checking would mean risking being wrong. Sir, she said again, more firmly now. I'm going to ask you to step away from the desk. The room tightened. The kind of tension that doesn't explode, it compresses. Guests shifted in their seats. Phones angled for a better view. Whispers moved like currents through the crowd. And Malik remained exactly where he was. Still. Centered. Unmoved. Like a man standing in the eye of something much bigger than a simple misunderstanding. Claire took a step closer. Close enough now that her voice didn't need to carry. You're causing a disturbance. He looked at her then. Really looked. Not with anger. Not with frustration. But with clarity. The kind that comes when a pattern finally completes itself. No, he said quietly. I'm revealing one. She frowned, not understanding yet, but sensing something shifting beneath her feet. And somewhere deep in the system she trusted, something had already started to break. The silence did not break all at once. It cracked slowly, like glass under pressure, spreading from one corner of the lobby to the other as eyes shifted and whispers grew louder. Claire Whitman felt it before she fully understood it. The balance had changed. Something about the man in front of her refused to move, refused to shrink, refused to follow the script she had already written in her mind. Malik Harrington did not raise his voice. He did not argue. He simply stood there, grounded, as if the marble beneath his feet belonged to him in a way no one else in the room could explain. Claire straightened her posture, doubling down on control, because control was the only language she knew in moments like this. I am going to ask you one last time, she said, her tone sharper now, louder, meant to reclaim the room. Step away from the desk, or we will have to escort you out. The word escort did not sound neutral. It carried weight. It carried implication. Around them, the room reacted. A man near the elevator let out a quiet breath, shaking his head slightly. The woman by the bar adjusted her phone, now fully recording, her eyes locked on Malik as if she knew the next few minutes would matter. And the young employee behind the desk, the one who had seen the name on the screen, felt her chest tighten. She looked again. Harrington. Executive tag. Owner-level clearance. The words were right there, glowing softly against the interface, undeniable. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, frozen between action and fear. Malik noticed. He always noticed the small things. The hesitation. The flicker of truth trying to surface. Go ahead, he said calmly, his voice low but clear enough to carry. Tell her what you see. The young employee swallowed. Claire turned sharply. Do not, she snapped, cutting her off before the words could form. The interruption was immediate, instinctive, because control depended on silence. The employee lowered her eyes, retreating into stillness, the moment slipping away. Claire exhaled, regaining her composure, then gestured subtly toward security. The two men near the entrance began to walk over, their steps measured, not aggressive, but deliberate enough to signal escalation. The lobby shifted again. Phones lifted higher. Conversations stopped completely now. This was no longer subtle. This was a scene. Malik remained exactly where he was. His hands stayed relaxed. his expression unchanged. But inside, something aligned. Not anger. Not frustration. Precision. The kind that comes when a moment reveals itself for what it truly is. He reached into his pocket slowly, not in defiance, but with purpose, and pulled out his phone. The movement drew attention immediately. Claire's eyes narrowed. "Sir, you cannot record staff without permission." Malik did not look at her. He tapped once, then lifted the phone slightly. "Angela," he said, his voice even, controlled. "I need you to access internal guest complaint records for this property. Full logs. No filters." On the other end, there was no hesitation. Angela had been with him for 9 years. She understood tone better than words. "Pulling now," she replied. Her voice, crisp and efficient, carried through the quiet lobby like a signal no one else fully understood. Claire scoffed softly, the sound thin, almost forced. "You think making a call changes anything?" Malik finally looked at her again. "Not long. Just enough. It already has." The security staff stopped a few feet away, uncertain now. Something about the exchange did not match what they had been told. One of them glanced toward Claire, waiting for a clearer instruction. She felt it. The hesitation spreading. The room no longer fully behind her. And that was something she was not used to. "Remove him," she said again, louder this time, pushing past the doubt. The words hung in the air, but they did not land the same way. Because now, the room was watching differently. Not as spectators. As witnesses. The woman recording near the bar stepped a little closer, her voice low but firm as she spoke to her audience. "He has not raised his voice once," she said. "Not once." A man near the seating area nodded in agreement. "This does not look right," he murmured. The current had shifted. Claire felt it slipping, and instinctively, she moved closer to Malik, closing the distance as if proximity could restore authority. "You are disrupting this environment," she said, her voice tight now, controlled but strained. Malik tilted his head slightly, the smallest movement, but enough to signal something deeper. "No," he repeated quietly. "I am exposing it." His phone buzzed softly in his hand. Angela's voice returned, this time different. Slower. Heavier. "Malik," she said, "there are multiple complaints flagged under this location. They were marked resolved, but the details suggest otherwise. There is a pattern." The word landed. Pattern. It did not need explanation. Malik's gaze did not break from Claire. "Read one," he said. There was a pause on the line, then Angela continued. "Guest reported being denied access to executive lounge despite verified status. Description mentions staff questioning appearance." Another pause. Second complaint. Guest card held for verification beyond standard protocol. Same descriptor. The air in the lobby changed completely. What had been tension now carried something sharper. Recognition. Claire's face shifted, just slightly, but enough. A crack. The young employee behind the desk looked up again, her eyes wider now. The truth no longer something she could ignore. Malik let the silence stretch. He did not rush. He did not need to. "How many?" he asked. Angela answered without hesitation. 12 in the last 6 months. A quiet gasp came from somewhere in the lobby. The number hung there, undeniable. Not an accident. Not a misunderstanding. A system. Claire opened her mouth, searching for control, for language, for something to anchor herself back into authority. "Those records are internal," she said quickly, her tone defensive now. "You do not have access to that information." Malik's expression did not change, but something in his eyes did. It sharpened, focused, final. "I do," he said. The words were simple, but the way he said them made the room still again. Even the security staff stepped back half a pace, uncertainty fully replacing intention. The woman recording whispered under her breath, "Who is he?" No one answered. Not yet, but everyone was about to find out. The words settled into the room like something heavy that refused to be ignored. "I do." Malik did not raise his voice, but the certainty in it carried further than any shout could have. Claire Whitman felt the shift instantly, not just in him, but in everything around her. The room was no longer responding to her authority. It was listening to him. That had never happened before. Not here. Not in her lobby. She took a step back without realizing it, a subtle movement, but enough to betray the first crack in her control. "That is not possible," she said quickly, her tone tightening as she tried to pull the moment back into something she understood. "Those systems are restricted to corporate access only." Malik did not move. He did not explain. He simply let the silence stretch again, because silence, when used correctly, did more than words ever could. Across the lobby, the young employee behind the desk could not hold it in any longer. Her voice came out softer than she intended, but it cut through anyway. The system shows owner-level clearance. The words landed harder than anything Malik had said so far. Claire turned sharply, her composure cracking just enough to reveal something raw underneath. "Excuse me." The employee hesitated for only a second this time, then continued, her voice gaining strength as truth replaced fear. "The reservation is real, and it is flagged as executive override. It says Harrington." A ripple moved through the room. Not loud, not chaotic, just enough to signal that something fundamental had shifted. The woman recording near the bar lowered her phone slightly, her expression changing from curiosity to realization. The man by the elevator straightened, no longer pretending not to watch. Even the security staff exchanged a glance, uncertainty now fully replacing instruction. Claire's jaw tightened. For a moment, she said nothing. And in that moment, everything she had built her authority on began to unravel. Because authority without certainty does not hold. It fractures. Malik watched it happen in real time. He had seen it before. In boardrooms. In negotiations. In spaces where power was assumed until it was proven wrong. He did not interrupt. He did not rush the moment. He let it breathe. Then, calmly, he spoke. "Angela, confirm access level." There was no hesitation on the line. "Full ownership verification confirmed," Angela replied. "Malik Harrington, majority stakeholder, Harrington Grand Properties." The words echoed through the phone speaker, clear, precise, undeniable. And just like that, the room shifted completely. Not gradually. Instantly. It was not loud, but it was absolute. Claire's face lost color. Not dramatically. Not theatrically. Just enough that anyone paying attention could see it. The certainty she had carried minutes ago was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. Awareness. "That is," she started, but the sentence did not finish. Because there was nothing she could say that would undo what had just been said out loud. Malik finally stepped forward, not aggressively, not forcefully, just one measured step that closed the distance between them. And somehow, that single step carried more weight than everything that had happened before it. "You asked me to leave," he said quietly. No anger, no raised tone, just fact. Claire swallowed, her posture shifting, trying to recover, to reposition, to find something to hold on to. "Mr. Harrington, if there has been a misunderstanding," Malik lifted his hand slightly. Not to silence her, but to stop the momentum of the excuse before it could form. "No," he said calmly. There was no misunderstanding. The room listened. Every word now carried consequence. "You saw me," he continued, his voice steady. "And you made a decision." Claire's eyes flickered, searching for ground that no longer existed. "We follow protocol," she said quickly, the words sounding weaker than she intended. Malik nodded once. Exactly. That single word landed like confirmation, not agreement. Around them, the energy in the lobby had transformed completely. What had been tension was now clarity. The woman recording whispered again, this time not to her audience, but to herself. "He owns this place." The words spread quietly, moving from one guest to another, each repetition sharpening the reality of what had just happened. Malik turned slightly, his gaze moving across the room, taking in the faces, the reactions, the witnesses. Then he looked back at Claire. "The problem is not that you did not know who I was," he said. His voice did not change, but the weight behind it did. "The problem is how you treated someone you thought did not matter." The sentence settled into the space like a verdict. Claire opened her mouth again, but this time nothing came out. Because there was no defense for something that had already been exposed. Behind the desk, the young employee straightened, no longer uncertain, her posture shifting as if the truth itself had given her permission to stand differently. One of the security staff stepped back completely now, his stance no longer aligned with Claire, but neutral, observing. The balance had fully reversed. Malik's phone buzzed again. Angela's voice returned, sharper now, more urgent. "Malik, I am sending full complaint logs to your device. There are patterns across multiple staff interactions. This is not isolated." Malik glanced down briefly, the screen lighting up with data, timestamps, reports that had been hidden behind polished service and controlled narratives. He did not react outwardly. But inside, the final piece clicked into place. This was not about a moment. This was about a system. He looked back up, his expression unchanged, but something deeper had settled into it. Decision. And in that moment, everyone in the room felt it, even if they could not yet name it. Claire took a small step forward, her voice quieter now, stripped of the authority it once carried. What would you like us to do to resolve this? The question hung there, fragile, uncertain, the complete opposite of the command she had given minutes earlier. Malik did not answer right away. He let the silence return one more time. Not as tension, as control. Because now, the room was not waiting to see what would happen. It was waiting for him to decide. The question did not sound like a command anymore. It sounded like something else. Something unfamiliar in that lobby. Vulnerability. Claire Whitman stood there, waiting, her hands no longer crossed, her posture no longer rigid, as if the authority she had worn like armor had quietly slipped off her shoulders without her noticing. Malik Harrington did not answer immediately. He let the silence stretch, not to intimidate, but to allow the weight of the moment to settle where it belonged. Around them, the room had shifted into something almost still, not frozen, but attentive in a way that luxury spaces rarely were. People were not pretending anymore. They were watching openly now, witnessing something they knew they would remember long after they left. Malik glanced once more at the screen in his hand, the complaint logs still glowing softly, each line a quiet record of moments just like this one, moments that had passed unnoticed, unchallenged, unresolved. Until now. He lifted his eyes back to Claire, and when he spoke, his voice carried a different kind of gravity, not louder, not sharper, but final. We start with the truth. The words landed gently, but they did not move. Claire nodded quickly, almost too quickly, eager to regain ground, to show alignment, to repair something that had already broken. Of course, she said, her tone softer now, careful, measured. We take these matters very seriously. Malik did not react to the statement. He had heard it too many times before, in too many rooms, from too many people who only took things seriously when they were no longer in control of them. Instead, he shifted his attention slightly, his gaze moving past her to the front desk. You, he said, looking at the young employee who had spoken earlier. She straightened immediately, caught between surprise and responsibility. What is your name? He asked. Emily, she replied, her voice steady now, no longer uncertain. Malik nodded once. Emily, I want you to say it again. Out loud. So everyone in this room hears it. The request was simple, but the effect was immediate. The room leaned in, not physically, but in focus, in attention, in expectation. Emily glanced at Claire for a brief second, then back at Malik. And this time, she did not hesitate. The system shows that you are the owner, she said clearly. Full access. Executive override. The words moved through the lobby like a current, connecting every person present in a shared understanding that could not be undone. Claire closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, the moment brief but telling, as if she was recalibrating, searching for a version of this situation she could still control. When she opened them again, her expression had changed. Less certain, more careful. Mr. Harrington, she began again, choosing her words with precision now. We deeply regret how this situation has been handled. Malik held her gaze. Handled, he repeated softly. The single word carried more weight than a paragraph. Claire paused, because even she could hear it now. The distance between what she said and what had actually happened. What would you call it? She asked, quieter now. Malik did not look away. A pattern, he said. The same word Angela had used. The same word that had shifted the room minutes earlier. Claire's lips parted slightly, but no response came. Because the moment was no longer about explanation. It was about recognition. Behind her, one of the other staff members shifted uncomfortably, the tension no longer external, but internal, turning inward, forcing reflection. Malik turned slightly, addressing the room without raising his voice. How many of you have ever been told you do not belong somewhere without anyone actually saying it? The question was not loud, but it carried. A man near the lounge chairs nodded slowly. The woman recording lowered her phone just enough to look around, noticing the subtle reactions from others. A quiet murmur moved through the space, not chaotic, but collective. Malik let that settle, then continued. It does not always sound like this, he said. gesturing lightly toward the desk. Sometimes it is a look, a pause, a question that should not need to be asked. Claire stood still, listening now, no longer interrupting, no longer directing, just present in a way she had not been before. Malik turned back to her. You said you follow protocol, he said. She nodded slightly. Yes. Malik held her gaze. Then show me the part of your protocol that requires you to doubt someone before you verify them. The question landed clean, direct, unavoidable. Claire's mind moved quickly, searching, processing, trying to reconstruct a defense that no longer aligned with the reality in front of her. We have standards in place to ensure the safety and experience of our guests, she said, the words sounding practiced, familiar. Malik nodded once. Standards are not the problem, he said. Assumptions are. The distinction hung in the air, sharp and clear. Around them, the staff behind the desk shifted again, their posture no longer unified, no longer aligned under a single direction. Something had broken there. Something structural. Malik's phone buzzed once more. He glanced down briefly, then back up. Angela has confirmed 12 complaints, he said. All marked resolved. None actually addressed. Claire's expression tightened again, but this time it was not about control. It was about realization. The kind that comes too late to prevent the moment, but early enough to understand it fully. I was not aware of those reports, she said quietly. Malik studied her for a second, not with suspicion, but with clarity. That does not change the fact that they exist, he replied. The room did not move. No one spoke, because there was nothing left to question. Only what would happen next. Claire took a breath, steadying herself, her voice softer now than it had been at any point since the interaction began. What do you want us to do? She asked again. This time, the question was different. Not defensive, not strategic, genuine. Malik looked at her, then at the staff, then at the room. And when he spoke again, his voice carried something new. Not just control, direction. We are going to fix it, he said. And in that moment, everyone understood that this was no longer about what had happened. It was about what would happen next. The words did not echo. They settled. We are going to fix it. Malik Harrington stood in the center of the lobby, calm, grounded, as if the decision had already been made long before. Anyone else realized there was a problem? Claire Whitman blinked slowly, absorbing the shift, her mind racing to keep up with a reality that had moved far beyond her control. Around them, the room did not return to normal. It could not. Something had been exposed, and once exposed, it could not be unseen. Malik turned slightly, his presence drawing the room with him, not by force, but by gravity. Angela, he said, lifting his phone again. Initiate internal review protocol. Full audit of this location. I want every complaint, every report, every flagged interaction pulled and verified. There was no hesitation. Already in progress, Angela replied. Compliance team is being alerted. Do you want live escalation? Malik's gaze moved across the front desk staff, then back to Claire. Yes, he said simply. The word landed like a switch being flipped somewhere far beyond the lobby walls. Claire felt it immediately, even without understanding the full scope. This was no longer contained. This was moving upward, outward, beyond her reach. She took a small breath, steadying herself, trying to regain a sense of footing. We can handle this internally, she said quickly, her voice careful now, measured, almost cautious. Malik looked at her, not with confrontation, but with clarity. You already did, he replied. The sentence was quiet, but it carried enough weight to stop her response before it formed. Behind the desk, Emily stood still, her hands resting lightly on the counter, her posture no longer hesitant. She was watching, learning, understanding in real time what accountability actually looked like when it was not filtered through hierarchy. One of the other staff members shifted beside her, eyes lowered, the confidence from earlier replaced with something else entirely. Reflection. Malik took another step forward, not toward Claire, but toward the center of the space, positioning himself where everyone could see him clearly. He was not raising his voice, but the room leaned in anyway, drawn by something more powerful than volume. This is what happens, he said, his tone steady, when silence becomes policy. The words moved through the lobby, connecting with something deeper than the moment itself. The woman who had been recording lowered her phone slightly, her expression no longer focused on capturing, but on understanding. The man near the elevator crossed his arms slowly, nodding once, as if something he had always known but never named had finally been said out loud. Claire stood where she was, no longer directing, no longer controlling, just listening, the weight of the moment settling onto her in layers she could not peel away. Malik continued, not rushing, not forcing, just letting each word land where it needed to. 12 complaints, he said. Not one of them addressed. Not one of them escalated. That is not a mistake. That is a system. The word returned again. System. It did not accuse. It revealed. Claire's shoulders lowered slightly, the last remnants of her earlier posture dissolving into something more human, more uncertain. I did not see those reports, she said quietly. Malik nodded once, acknowledging the statement without validating it. Then that is part of the problem, he replied. There was no harshness in his tone, just truth, the kind that did not need emphasis, the kind that stood on its own. His phone buzzed again. Angela's voice returned, this time with a new edge. Malik, compliance officers are joining the call. They want confirmation to proceed with on-site intervention. Malik did not look away from Claire. Confirmed, he said. The word was final. Claire's eyes flickered, the reality of the situation expanding beyond her immediate control. On-site intervention meant oversight. It meant documentation. It meant that everything that had just happened was no longer contained within the walls of the Harrington Grand. It was now part of a larger record, a larger consequence. Malik lowered his phone slightly, then turned his attention back to the staff behind the desk. No one is losing their voice in this room today, he said calmly. If you saw something, if you knew something, this is the moment to speak. The invitation was simple, but its impact was immediate. The silence that followed was different this time. Not tense, not uncertain, open. Emily glanced at the others beside her, then back at Malik. She took a breath. There were times, she said, her voice steady, when guests were questioned differently based on how they looked. It was not written anywhere, but it happened. The words hung in the air, undeniable. One of the other employees shifted again, then spoke quietly, almost reluctantly. We were told to be cautious with certain guests, he added. To verify more. To check more. Claire closed her eyes briefly, the weight of those statements settling in, not as accusations, but as confirmations of something she had not seen clearly before. Malik listened without interrupting, his expression unchanged, but his focus sharp. Caution is not the issue, he said after a moment. Bias disguised as caution is. The distinction cut cleanly through the space. No one argued. No one corrected. Because there was nothing to correct. Malik took a slow breath, then looked around the lobby one more time, taking in the people, the witnesses, the shift that had taken place in less than 20 minutes. This place was built to represent excellence, he said, not exclusivity. The words settled into the room like a reset, a redefinition of something that had quietly drifted away from its original purpose. Claire opened her eyes and looked at him, not as an authority figure, not as a manager, but as someone standing in front of the truth of what had happened under her leadership. What happens now? She asked, her voice steady, but stripped of everything it had carried before. Malik held her gaze for a moment, then answered. Now, he said calmly, we make sure this never happens again. And in that moment, everyone in the room understood that this was not the end of the situation. It was the beginning of something much bigger. The lobby did not return to its polished illusion. It transformed into something raw, something exposed, something real. Malik Harrington stood steady at the center of it, not as a man reclaiming power, but as someone redefining it in real time. The words he had spoken still lingered in the air, not fading, not softening, but settling deeper into the space, embedding themselves into the moment. Claire Whitman felt it fully now. The shift was no longer external. It was internal. Her shoulders, once squared with certainty, now carried the weight of realization. And for the first time since this began, she was not thinking about control. She was thinking about consequence. Malik did not rush. He did not escalate with emotion. Instead, he shifted his focus forward, his voice calm, measured, but unmistakably decisive. Angela, he said, lifting his phone slightly, bring compliance on speaker. A brief pause. Then a new voice entered the space, firm, professional, unmistakably corporate. This is Daniel Reeves, Senior Compliance Officer. We are monitoring the situation live. The presence of another authority, one that did not belong to the lobby, changed the atmosphere again. It widened the room. It made everything feel larger, more permanent. Malik nodded once, though Daniel could not see him. You have heard enough to understand the pattern, Malik said. I want confirmation of next steps. Daniel did not hesitate. Based on what we have documented, we will initiate a full operational review of this location. Immediate assessment of management conduct, staff training procedures, and complaint handling systems. The words were not dramatic, but they were definitive. Claire closed her eyes briefly again, but this time it was not to gather herself. It was to accept what was unfolding, because this was no longer a moment she could correct. It was a process that had already begun. Malik turned slightly, his gaze returning to the room, to the staff, to the witnesses. This is what accountability looks like, he said quietly. Not apology, not explanation. Action. The distinction landed clearly. No one in the room mistook what was happening for a misunderstanding anymore. This was a correction, a recalibration. Behind the desk, Emily stood taller now, no longer a silent observer, but part of the moment itself. The other staff members shifted again, their silence no longer protective, but reflective, as if each of them was now measuring their own role in something they had not fully questioned before. Claire stepped forward slowly, her movements careful, deliberate, no longer driven by authority, but by awareness. Mr. Harrington, she said, her voice steady, though quieter than before. I take full responsibility for what has happened here. Malik looked at her, not dismissing, not accepting, simply listening. Claire continued, choosing each word with care. This was not handled correctly, and I understand now that it reflects more than just one interaction. Malik held her gaze for a moment, then nodded slightly. Understanding is the first step, he said, but it is not the last. Claire nodded, absorbing the response, not pushing back, not defending, just present in a way she had not been at the beginning. The room remained still, but the stillness was different now. It was not tension. It was transition. Malik's phone buzzed again. Daniel's voice returned. Malik, we are dispatching a regional oversight team. They will be on site within the hour. In the meantime, we recommend immediate suspension of current management authority pending review. The words landed heavily, not with shock, but with finality. Claire heard them clearly, every syllable, and for the first time, she did not resist. She nodded once, slowly, as if acknowledging something she could not change. Malik did not react outwardly. He simply responded. Approved. The word was quiet, but it carried authority far beyond the room. Claire's position, her control, her command over the space, all of it shifted in that moment. Not stripped, not taken, replaced, by process, by accountability, by something larger than any single role. Malik lowered his phone, then looked at her again. This is not personal, he said calmly. Claire met his gaze. I understand, she replied. And for the first time, it sounded true. Malik nodded slightly. Good, he said. Then he turned back toward the staff. From this moment forward, every interaction in this lobby is documented. Every guest is treated with the same level of respect, regardless of appearance, assumption, or expectation. His voice did not rise. It did not need to. The room listened. Fully. Completely. If you are unsure, he continued, you verify. You do not assume. You do not decide before you know. The words were not complicated, but they carried a clarity that had been missing before. Emily nodded quietly, absorbing each instruction, her posture now aligned with something new. One of the other employees spoke softly. Understood. The shift was complete. Not just in authority. In culture. In awareness. Malik took a slow breath, then looked around the lobby one more time. The guests, the staff, the witnesses. Everyone who had been part of this moment, whether they realized it or not. This place represents something, he said. And starting now, it represents the right thing. The sentence did not demand applause. It did not seek validation. It simply set a standard. Claire stood beside the desk now, no longer behind it. Her position changed not by force, but by reality. She looked at Malik again, her expression steady, grounded. Thank you, she said quietly. Malik did not respond immediately. Then he gave a small nod. Not acknowledgement, not acceptance, just recognition of the moment. And in that moment, the Harrington Grand was no longer the same place it had been 20 minutes earlier. The lobby no longer felt like a place of quiet luxury. It felt like a threshold. Something had ended, and something else had begun, and everyone standing there knew they were inside. That shift. Malik Harrington did not move from where he stood, but the space around him had already rearranged itself. Not physically, structurally. Authority had changed shape. Claire Whitman remained still beside the desk, her position no longer elevated, no longer central, but not dismissed either. She stood in a space that required something new from her. Not control. Accountability. Malik's presence did not press down on the room. It anchored it. His silence now carried more than his words had earlier, because the decision had already been made, and everyone could feel it settling into place. His phone buzzed again, softer this time, almost like a continuation of what had already been set in motion. He glanced down briefly, then spoke. Angela, status. Regional team is en route, Angela replied. Estimated arrival, 32 minutes. Legal has flagged the incident for documentation review. They are requesting full witness accounts. Malik nodded once. They will get them, he said. He lifted his gaze, scanning the room, not searching, but acknowledging. The witnesses were no longer passive. They were part of the record now. The woman who had been recording earlier lowered her phone completely, her role shifting from observer to participant. The man near the elevator stepped forward slightly, no longer pretending distance. The room had chosen its position. Malik turned back toward the desk. From this point forward, he said, his tone steady. Everything said here is part of the official record. The sentence did not sound threatening. It sounded clarifying. Emily nodded immediately, her posture aligned with the shift. One of the other staff members swallowed quietly, the weight of that statement settling into his understanding of what came next. Claire took a slow breath, then stepped forward half a pace, not reclaiming space, but meeting the moment. What do you need from me? She asked. The question was no longer defensive. It was direct. Malik looked at her, considering for a brief moment, not judging, not weighing, simply recognizing where she now stood. Truth, he said. Clear. Complete. Without revision. Claire nodded slowly. There was no hesitation this time. Understood. The room held still again, but not with tension. With expectation. Malik shifted his attention slightly. We start now, he said. He gestured lightly toward Emily. You already spoke. Stay with that. Emily nodded, her voice steady when she answered. There were repeated instances where guests were questioned. Differently. It was not written policy, but it was understood behavior. Malik listened without interruption. Then he turned to the others. Continue. The second employee spoke, his voice quieter but no less clear. We were encouraged to verify certain guests more thoroughly, sometimes based on how they presented themselves. Malik's expression did not change, but his focus sharpened. Encouraged by who, he asked. The employee hesitated for only a moment, then answered. Management direction. The words hung in the air. Not loud, not aggressive, but definitive. Claire did not interrupt. She did not correct. She stood there, listening, absorbing, allowing the truth to surface without interference. Malik turned his gaze back to her. Not accusing, not confrontational, just present. Claire met his eyes and spoke. There were discussions about maintaining brand standards, she said. But I see now how those discussions were interpreted and applied. Malik nodded slightly. Interpretation becomes action, he said. And action becomes pattern. The structure of the problem revealed itself again, piece by piece, not through accusation, but through clarity. Malik's phone buzzed once more. Daniel's voice returned, measured, precise. Malik, legal is requesting confirmation of leadership status during the incident. Who held operational authority at the time? Malik did not look away from Claire. Claire Whitman, he said. There was no pause. No hesitation. Just fact. Daniel responded immediately. Noted. That will be included in the report. Claire exhaled slowly, the acknowledgement settling in. Not as blame. As record. Malik lowered the phone again, then looked at the room. This is how systems change, he said. Not through statements. Through documentation. Through accountability that cannot be rewritten later. The guests listened closely now, not as outsiders, but as witnesses to a process they rarely saw in real time. The woman who had been recording nodded slightly, her expression thoughtful, as if she understood the weight of what was happening beyond the surface of the moment. Malik took a step back, creating space, not retreating, but allowing the room to hold what had been said. Every voice matters here, he continued. Not just the ones in position. The ones who see. The ones who know. The ones who choose to speak. Emily straightened again, her confidence now rooted in something real. Another staff member nodded quietly, the shift no longer external, but internal, reshaping how they understood their role. Claire looked around the room, taking in the people, the witnesses, the staff, the reality of what had unfolded under her leadership. I should have seen it, she said quietly. Malik looked at her, not dismissing the statement, but placing it in context. Now you do, he replied. The sentence was not harsh. It was forward-facing, because the moment was no longer about what had been missed. It was about what would be done next. Malik glanced at his phone once more, then back at the room. When the regional team arrives, he said, this becomes formal. But what matters is what happens before they walk through that door. The statement landed with clarity. The next 30 minutes were not empty. They were defining. Malik's voice lowered slightly, but it carried just as clearly. You decide what this place becomes from this point forward. The responsibility did not sit on one person anymore. It expanded. It included everyone present. Claire nodded slowly, understanding the weight of that shift. The staff stood differently now, no longer aligned under assumption, but under awareness. The guests remained, not out of curiosity, but because they recognized they were witnessing something that rarely unfolded this openly. Malik remained at the center, not directing every detail, but holding the standard steady, unshaken, undeniable. And in that moment, the Harrington Grand was no longer defined by what had happened earlier that morning. It was being redefined by what was happening now. The next few minutes did not move like normal time. They stretched, thick and deliberate, as if every second carried weight. The Harrington Grand lobby was no longer a place people passed through. It had become a space where something was being decided in real time. Malik Harrington stood exactly where he had been, not shifting, not pacing, his presence steady, almost immovable, like an anchor holding the entire moment in place. Around him, the staff no longer operated on instinct. They operated on awareness. Every glance, every word, every movement carried intention now, because they understood that what happened next would not disappear once the moment ended. It would remain, recorded, remembered, repeated if nothing changed. Claire Whitman remained near the desk, her posture no longer guarded, but open in a way that required something far more difficult than control. It required honesty. She looked at Malik, then at her staff, then at the guests who had become witnesses. And for a brief moment, she allowed herself to see the situation without defense. Not as a misunderstanding, not as a mistake, as a reflection. Malik's voice broke the quiet, not loudly, but with precision. There is something else, he said. The words pulled attention back to him instantly. He lifted his phone slightly, the screen still active with the complaint logs Angela had sent. Patterns do not begin where they are reported, he continued. They begin where they are allowed. The sentence settled into the room, deeper than anything before it, because it did not point outward. It pointed inward. Claire absorbed it, her expression tightening slightly, not from resistance, but from recognition. Malik looked at her directly. Tell me, he said calmly, when was the first time you noticed something felt off? The question was not accusatory. It was surgical. Claire hesitated, not because she did not know the answer, but because saying it out loud would make it real in a way she could not undo. The room waited. No one moved. No one interrupted. And then she spoke. There were small things, she said slowly. Moments where interactions felt different, where guests were questioned longer than necessary, where tone shifted depending on who was standing in front of the desk. Her voice did not shake, but it carried something heavier than uncertainty. It carried admission. Malik nodded once, not surprised. And what did you do with those moments? He asked. Claire exhaled quietly. I told myself they were isolated, she said, that they did not reflect the overall operation. Malik held her gaze. And now? Claire did not look away. Now I see that they were not isolated, she said. They were connected. The word echoed the one that had defined everything so far. Pattern. System. Connection. Malik lowered his phone slightly, letting the silence return again, but this time it was not empty. It was full of understanding that had not existed before. Behind the desk, Emily listened closely, her expression focused, absorbing not just the situation, but the process of how truth was being uncovered, piece by piece, without force, without chaos, just clarity. One of the other staff members shifted, then spoke quietly. "We thought we were protecting the brand," he said. Malik turned his attention to him. "From what?" he asked. The question was simple, but it cut deeper than any accusation could have. The employee hesitated, searching for an answer that made sense now, in this moment, under this light. "From risk," he said finally. Malik nodded slightly. "And how did you define that risk?" The employee did not answer right away, because now, the definition did not hold the same shape it had before. Claire stepped in, her voice steady. "We defined it based on perception," she said. Malik looked at her, the connection immediate. "Exactly," he replied. "Perception without verification becomes bias." The words did not land as criticism. They landed as truth. And truth, once spoken clearly, does not require repetition. The room remained still, but the stillness now felt different. It felt like something settling into place. Something being understood at a level deeper than policy or procedure. Malik took a slow breath, then looked around the lobby again, not scanning, but acknowledging the space itself, the place that had carried this pattern quietly until now. "This building did not create the problem," he said. "People did." The statement was direct, not harsh, just clear. Claire nodded slowly, accepting it without resistance, because there was no argument left to make. Malik's phone buzzed again. Angela's voice returned, softer this time, but with urgency beneath it. "Malik, additional reports are coming in from other properties. Similar patterns. Different locations." The words shifted the scale of the situation instantly. This was no longer contained to one lobby, one manager, one moment. Malik's expression did not change, but his focus sharpened. "How many locations?" he asked. "Preliminary count is 4, Angela replied. The number hung in the air, expanding the weight of everything that had already been revealed. Claire's eyes widened slightly, not in shock, but in realization of how far this extended beyond her immediate control. Malik nodded once. "Forward everything to compliance," he said. "Flag for cross-location review." "Already in process," Angela confirmed. Malik lowered the phone again, then looked back at the room. "This is bigger than this moment," he said. "But this moment is where it stops." The sentence landed with finality. Not dramatic, not loud, just certain. Claire took a breath, her posture shifting again, not back into control, but into responsibility that extended beyond her own role. "What do you need from me moving forward?" she asked. Malik considered for a brief second. "Ownership," he said. "Not of the title. Of the impact." Claire nodded slowly. "Understood." The staff stood differently now, no longer waiting for instruction, but processing their own place in what had been uncovered. The guests remained quiet, but their presence carried weight, a reminder that what had happened was not invisible, not hidden, not something that could be quietly corrected without acknowledgement. Malik looked around one more time, then spoke again, his voice steady, grounded. "Change does not happen when it is convenient," he said. "It happens when it is necessary." And in that moment, everyone in the room understood that necessity had already arrived. The weight of the moment did not fade. It deepened. The lobby of the Harrington Grand no longer carried the illusion of perfection. It carried truth, and truth had a way of changing everything it touched. Malik Harrington stood unmoved, his presence no longer questioned, no longer misunderstood, but fully recognized for what it was. Not just authority, accountability in motion. Around him, the room had shifted into alignment with that reality. No one was pretending anymore. Not the staff, not the guests, not even Claire Whitman. She stood there with a clarity that had not existed an hour ago, her role no longer defined by control, but by what she chose to do next. Malik's phone buzzed again, but this time he did not look at it immediately. Instead, he looked at the room, letting the silence settle one more time, because now silence was no longer avoidance. It was reflection. "There is one more thing," he said, his voice calm, but carrying a weight that pulled every eye back to him. He lifted the phone slowly, glancing at the incoming data Angela had just sent. His expression did not change, but something in his stillness sharpened. "Angela has identified something else," he continued. "The complaints were not just ignored. Some were reclassified." The words landed with precision. Claire's brow tightened slightly. "Reclassified?" she asked, her voice steady. but cautious. Malik nodded once. Downgraded. Labeled as minor service issues instead of discrimination concerns. The room reacted, not loudly, but visibly. The woman near the bar shook her head slowly. The man by the elevator let out a quiet breath. Emily's eyes widened slightly, her understanding shifting again, deeper this time. Claire stood still, absorbing the information, her mind connecting pieces that had never been placed together before. That was not my instruction, she said quietly. Malik looked at her, not questioning, not dismissing, simply acknowledging the statement. But it happened under your system, he replied. The distinction was clear. Responsibility did not require direct action. It required oversight. Claire nodded slowly. Then I take responsibility for that as well, she said. The words were not defensive. They were grounded. Real. Malik gave a slight nod, recognizing the shift. Behind him, one of the guests stepped forward slightly, his voice calm but firm. I stayed here 3 months ago, he said. I remember seeing something similar. A guest being questioned longer than necessary. It did not feel right then either. The statement added weight, not as evidence, but as confirmation. The pattern was no longer internal. It was visible, shared, real. Malik turned slightly toward him. Thank you, he said simply. No dramatics. No emphasis. Just acknowledgement. The man nodded and stepped back, his role complete. Claire looked around the room, taking in the faces, the voices, the reality that had been building quietly beneath the surface for longer than she had realized. We missed it, she said softly. Malik did not correct her, but he did not let the statement settle without clarity. You did not miss it, he said. You minimized it. The words were not harsh, but they were exact. Claire closed her eyes briefly, the truth landing fully this time. Not as something external, as something she now owned. When she opened them again, there was no resistance left. Only understanding. Malik's phone buzzed once more. This time, he answered immediately. Angela. Malik, she said, her tone focused. Legal has confirmed that reclassification of complaints without escalation violates internal compliance standards. This will trigger automatic review of management conduct. Malik nodded once. Understood. He ended the call and looked back at Claire. This is now a formal violation, he said. The words did not accuse. They defined. Claire nodded slowly, accepting it without hesitation. I understand, she replied. And this time, there was no distance between what she said and what she meant. The room remained still, but the stillness now carried resolution. Not comfort, not relief. Direction. Malik took a slow breath, then stepped slightly closer to the desk again, not to reclaim space, but to anchor the next phase of what was about to happen. The regional team will be here shortly, he said. When they arrive, this becomes official. But what matters is what happens right now. He looked at the staff, then at Claire. Transparency does not begin when oversight arrives, he continued. It begins before. The statement landed clearly. No one questioned it. No one resisted. Because at this point, resistance no longer made sense. Malik's voice lowered slightly, but it carried just as strongly. Every action from this point forward defines whether this was a moment or a turning point. The distinction was clear. This could either fade into memory or reshape everything. Claire nodded slowly, her posture steady, her understanding complete. It will be a turning point, she said. Malik held her gaze for a moment, then gave a slight nod. Not approval, not endorsement, recognition. Around them, the staff stood differently now, no longer uncertain, no longer divided, but aligned under something that had not existed before. Clarity. Emily glanced at the others, then back at Malik, her voice quiet but firm. We will do this right, she said. Malik nodded once. That is the only way it works, he replied. The lobby remained full, but the energy had changed completely. What had started as tension had become transformation. What had begun as assumption had become accountability. And at the center of it all stood Malik Harrington, not as a man proving his authority, but as someone ensuring that authority meant something real. The doors at the front of the hotel remained closed, but everyone in the room could feel it. Something was about to walk in. And when it did, nothing in this place would operate the same way again. The moment did not break with noise. It shifted with presence. The glass doors at the entrance of the Harrington Grand opened quietly, but every person in the lobby felt it immediately. 3 individuals stepped inside, dressed not in luxury, but in precision. Dark suits, Minimal expression, purposeful movement. The regional oversight team had arrived. They did not rush. They did not announce themselves loudly. They did not need to. Authority, when real, did not require volume. It required recognition. Malik Harrington turned slightly, acknowledging them with a single glance, then returned his focus to the room. Because even now, the center of this moment was not their arrival. It was what had already been exposed. The lead officer, a woman in her early 40s with a composed and focused demeanor, approached with measured steps. "Mr. Harrington," she said, her voice clear, professional. "I am Lisa Grant, Regional Compliance Director." Malik nodded once. "We have been expecting you," he replied. Lisa glanced briefly around the lobby, taking in the staff, the guests, the atmosphere that no longer resembled a standard operational environment. It was something else entirely. A live audit in motion. "We will begin immediately," she said. Her tone was not aggressive. It was procedural, final. Claire Whitman stepped forward slightly, her posture steady, her voice composed. "I am Claire Whitman, General Manager," she said. "I am prepared to cooperate fully." Lisa nodded, acknowledging her without judgment. "Your cooperation is expected," she replied. The distinction was subtle, but clear. This was no longer about willingness. It was about process. Malik stepped slightly to the side, not stepping back, but allowing the structure of the next phase to unfold. He was no longer directing every word. He had already set the standard. Now the system would act on it. Lisa turned toward her team, giving a small nod. Two additional officers moved into position, one approaching the front desk, the other positioning near the center of the lobby. Devices were activated. Notes began. Every detail now carried weight beyond the moment. Lisa faced Claire again. "We will begin with a direct account of the incident," she said. Claire nodded. No hesitation. No delay. At approximately 10:12 this morning, Claire began, her voice steady, clear. Mr. Harrington entered the lobby and approached the front desk. His reservation was questioned based on staff perception rather than system verification. I reinforced that approach and instructed further scrutiny. She paused briefly, not to avoid, but to ensure accuracy. I then directed that he be removed from the desk area before completing proper verification. The words did not tremble. They did not soften. They stood exactly as they were. Lisa nodded once, recording the statement without interruption. "Continue," she said. Claire took a slow breath. During this process, prior complaint patterns were not considered. Internal reports were not escalated appropriately. Some were reclassified incorrectly. She stopped there, not because there was more to hide, but because she had reached the core of it. Lisa glanced at her team, then back at Claire. "Your statement is noted," she said. She turned slightly. "We will now collect supporting accounts." Emily stepped forward first, her voice steady, aligned with everything she had already said. The second employee followed, confirming the pattern, the direction, the behavior that had become normalized without being questioned. Each word added structure to what had already been understood. Not new information. Confirmation. The guests were asked next. The man near the elevator spoke clearly, recounting his previous experience. The woman who had recorded earlier shared what she had witnessed in real time. Each account aligned. Each detail reinforced the same pattern. Lisa listened without interruption, her expression unchanged, her focus absolute. When the statements concluded, she stepped back slightly, reviewing the information already collected. Then she spoke. "Based on initial findings, there is sufficient evidence to confirm a pattern of biased guest handling and improper complaint classification." The words were not dramatic. They were definitive. Claire closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again, steady, grounded, accepting the outcome without resistance. Malik remained where he was, his presence unchanged, not reacting outwardly, because this was no longer about reaction. It was about result. Lisa continued. "Effective immediately, operational authority for this location is suspended pending full review." The sentence landed clearly. Not as punishment, as process. Claire nodded once. "Understood," she said. And for the first time since this began, there was no weight in her voice. Only clarity. Lisa turned to her team. "Interim leadership will be assigned within the hour," she said. "All current operations will continue under supervised protocol." The structure was complete. The system had taken over. Malik looked around the lobby one more time. Not searching, not scanning, just acknowledging the transformation that had taken place within a single morning. The space was no longer defined by assumption. It was defined by accountability. Lisa turned back to him. "Mr. Harrington, do you have any additional directives?" she asked. Malik considered for a brief moment, then spoke. "Only one," he said. The room listened. "Make sure this is not documented as an isolated incident," he continued. "It is not." Lisa nodded once. "It will be recorded as a systemic review trigger," she confirmed. Malik gave a slight nod. That was enough. The lobby remained full, but the energy had shifted completely. What had begun as a moment of exclusion had become a turning point of exposure. What had been hidden was now visible. What had been minimized was now documented. And at the center of it all, Malik Harrington stood not as someone who demanded respect, but as someone who ensured it was no longer optional. The shift from exposure to consequence was quiet, but absolute. The Harrington Grand no longer operated on assumption. It operated under observation. Every movement behind the front desk was measured, every interaction deliberate, every word chosen with care. The presence of the compliance team had not disrupted the space. It had clarified it. Malik Harrington remained near the center of the lobby, his posture unchanged, his expression steady, but the role he held in that moment had evolved. He was no longer revealing the problem. He was watching the system respond to it. Lisa Grant stood with her team, reviewing the collected statements, her attention precise, her movements efficient. She did not rush. She did not delay. She moved with the rhythm of someone who understood that accuracy mattered more than speed. Claire Whitman stood nearby, no longer positioned behind the desk, no longer directing the flow of the room, but not removed either. She remained present, part of the process, part of the accountability that had taken shape. Malik's phone remained silent for a moment, and in that silence, something else surfaced. Not in the room. In him. A memory. Not sharp. Not overwhelming. Just present. He was 23, standing in a smaller hotel lobby, not unlike this one, but without the polished marble, without the chandeliers, without the illusion of prestige. He had walked in with a reservation, just like today. He had spoken calmly, just like today, and he had been met with the same look, the same pause, the same quiet doubt that never needed to be spoken out loud. Back then, he had not had a name that carried weight. He had not had ownership. He had not had a system to call. He had simply stood there, absorbing the moment, understanding something without being told. That access was not always about what you had. Sometimes it was about what people believed you were allowed to have. The memory did not linger. It did not pull him backward. It moved through him, connecting past to present, reinforcing something he had always known but never needed to say out loud. This was not new. This was just the first time it had been stopped in real time. Malik returned fully to the present, his gaze steady, his focus clear. Across the lobby, the staff continued. Under the direction of the compliance team, Emily assisted where needed, her confidence no longer tentative, her actions aligned with a clarity that had not existed earlier that morning. The other employees followed suit, their movements no longer driven by assumption, but by verification, by awareness, by the understanding that every action now mattered beyond the immediate moment. Lisa approached Malik again, her posture composed, her voice steady. "We have completed the initial assessment," she said. Malik nodded slightly. "And?" he asked. Lisa held his gaze. "The findings support a systemic issue, not an isolated incident. Interim leadership will be implemented immediately, and all current management responsibilities are officially suspended pending final review." The words were expected, but hearing them spoken out loud carried weight. Not because they changed what had already happened, but because they confirmed what would happen next. Malik nodded once. "Good," he said simply. Claire stood a few feet away, listening, her expression calm, grounded, not resisting, not deflecting. When Lisa finished, Claire stepped forward slightly. "What is required of me during the review?" she asked. Lisa turned to her. "Full cooperation, complete transparency, and availability for follow-up documentation," she replied. Claire nodded. "You will have it," she said, and there was no hesitation in her voice. Malik watched the exchange without interruption. This was no longer about confrontation. It was about structure, about ensuring that what had been revealed did not return to being hidden again. A guest near the seating area spoke quietly, almost to himself, but loud enough to be heard. "This is how it should always be handled." The statement was simple, but it carried the weight of observation, of expectation, of what people often believed would never actually happen. Malik turned slightly toward him, offering a brief nod of acknowledgement. Because that was exactly the point. This should not have been rare. It should have been standard. Lisa glanced at her team, then back at Malik. We will remain on-site until full transition is complete, she said. Malik nodded. Understood. The lobby continued to function, but not in the same way it had before. Guests approached the desk, and for the first time that day, there was no hesitation in how they were greeted. No pause that carried doubt. No glance that required interpretation. Just process. Clear. Direct. Equal. Malik watched it unfold, not with satisfaction, but with confirmation. This was what it was supposed to look like. Not perfect, but correct. Claire stood quietly, observing the same shift, her understanding deepening with each interaction she witnessed under the new structure. This was not just about correcting a mistake. It was about redefining a standard she had allowed to drift. Malik's phone buzzed once more. Angela's voice came through, softer now, but steady. Malik, media monitoring has picked up early signals. The incident is beginning to circulate online. Malik did not react immediately. And he asked. The narrative is forming, Angela said. But it is aligned with what actually happened. Malik nodded slightly. Good, he replied. He ended the call and looked back at the room. The truth did not need to be managed. It needed to be clear. Lisa stepped back into position, continuing coordination with her team. The structure held. The process moved forward. Malik remained where he was, not because he needed to stay, but because the moment was not finished yet. Not completely. He looked around the lobby one more time, taking in the space, the people, the shift that had taken place within less than an hour. This was no longer the same environment he had walked into. It had been forced to become something better. And in that moment, Malik understood something clearly. This was not just about one location. It was about setting a precedent that would reach far beyond these walls. Because once something like this was exposed and corrected in the open, it changed the expectation everywhere else. And expectations, once raised, did not go back down. By the time the lobby clock shifted another minute forward, the Harrington Grand no longer felt like a place recovering from a mistake. It felt like a place being rebuilt in real time. Not physically, structurally. The marble floors still reflected the chandeliers above. The air still carried the quiet hum of luxury. But beneath that surface, something fundamental had changed, and everyone present could feel it. Malik Harrington remained where he had been, not out of necessity, but because the moment had not fully closed. He was not watching for errors anymore. He was watching for alignment. And slowly, it was happening. Behind the front desk, Emily assisted a guest with calm precision, her tone even, her process clear, no hesitation, no unnecessary questioning, just direct service rooted in respect. Another employee handled a check-in beside her, following the same rhythm, the same standard, as if the shift that had taken place had already begun to take hold. Claire Whitman stood a few feet away, observing, not intervening, not directing, simply witnessing the new flow that was forming without her control, but not without her awareness. Malik noticed the difference immediately. It was subtle, but it was real. Lisa Grant approached again, her tablet in hand, her attention focused. Interim leadership has been confirmed, she said. A senior operations manager from our regional office will assume temporary authority within the next 20 minutes. Malik nodded once. And the staff? He asked. Lisa glanced toward the desk, then back at him. All staff will remain active under supervised protocol. Additional training will be implemented immediately following the review. Malik considered that for a moment, then nodded. Good, he said. Do not remove people before you understand their role in the system. Fix the system, then evaluate the people. Lisa gave a small nod of agreement. That is the plan, she replied. The distinction mattered. Because this was not about replacing individuals. It was about correcting the structure that had shaped their behavior. Malik looked around the lobby again, his gaze steady, taking in the movement, the adjustment, the quiet recalibration happening in front of him. The guests who had remained were no longer watching out of curiosity. They were watching because they understood they were witnessing something uncommon. Not perfection, correction. And correction, when done openly, carried weight far beyond the moment itself. Claire stepped forward slowly, her posture steady, her voice calm. I can see the difference already, she said quietly. Malik turned slightly toward her. Because now there is clarity, he replied. Claire nodded. I should have created that clarity before today, she said. Malik did not respond immediately. Then he said, You have it now. The words were not forgiving. They were forward. Claire accepted them as such, her expression grounded, her understanding complete. Malik's phone buzzed again. He glanced down briefly, then answered. Angela. Malik, she said, media coverage is expanding. The narrative is focused on immediate accountability and leadership response. It is being received positively. Malik listened, then responded simply. Let it remain accurate, he said. No adjustments. No statements yet. Understood, Angela replied. He ended the call and returned his attention to the room. The truth did not need to be shaped. It needed to be maintained. Lisa stepped slightly closer. We will begin staff briefing shortly, she said. New operational expectations, immediate effect. Malik nodded. Include everyone, he said. No exceptions. Lisa agreed. Of course. The staff gathered gradually near the front desk, their movements quiet, their expressions focused. Not fearful, not defensive, aware. Lisa addressed them clearly, outlining the immediate changes, the expectations, the structure that would now define every interaction moving forward. She did not speak in abstract terms. She spoke in specifics. Verification before assumption. Equal treatment without exception. Documentation of any deviation. The words were clear. The expectations undeniable. Emily listened closely, her posture aligned with every instruction. The others followed, not out of obligation, but because the standard had been made visible in a way that could no longer be ignored. Malik stood slightly apart, not leading the briefing, but reinforcing it simply by being present. His presence was no longer a question. It was a reference point. When Lisa finished, she looked at the staff. Does anyone have questions? The room remained quiet for a moment. Then Emily spoke. No questions, she said. Just clarity. Lisa nodded once. Good, she replied. Malik watched the exchange, then took a slow step forward, not to take control, but to close the moment with something that would remain long after the briefing ended. This is not about today, he said, his voice calm, steady, carrying through the space without force. This is about every day after today. The staff listened. The guests listened. Even Claire held still, her attention fully on him. Malik continued. Respect is not something you apply when you recognize someone, he said. It is something you give before you know who they are. The sentence settled into the room, deeper than anything else that had been said, because it removed the condition. It removed the excuse. It removed the gap where bias had lived. Claire closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again, her expression clear, her understanding complete. Lisa gave a slight nod, recognizing the statement for what it was. Not instruction. Principle. Malik looked around one final time, taking in the space that had changed in less than an hour, the system that had been exposed, corrected, and reset in real time. This was not an ending. It was a reset point, a new baseline. And in that moment, the Harrington Grand was no longer defined by the moment it had failed. It was defined by the moment it chose to change. The lobby did not erupt into applause. It did not need to. What settled into the Harrington Grand was something far more lasting than noise. It was understanding. It was alignment. It was a standard that had finally been made visible in a way no one could ignore or reinterpret. Malik Harrington stood quietly as the movement around him continued, not chaotic, not forced, but steady, intentional, as if the entire space had recalibrated itself around a new center. Guests checked in without hesitation. Staff responded without assumption. Every interaction now carried a clarity that had been missing before, and that clarity changed everything. Claire Whitman remained near the desk, no longer separated from the process, no longer positioned above it, but fully within it. She watched each exchange closely, not searching for mistakes, but recognizing the difference. The tone, the pace, the absence of doubt. It was subtle, but it was undeniable. Malik noticed it too, not with surprise, with confirmation. This was what the system looked like when it functioned the way it was supposed to. Lisa Grant stood with her team, finalizing notes, confirming transitions, ensuring that every step taken in the last hour was not just understood, but documented, structured, and repeatable. This was no longer a moment. It was a reference. Malik took a slow breath, then stepped slightly forward, not to reclaim attention, but because the moment had reached its natural conclusion. The room did not shift toward him this time. It remained steady, because what needed to be said no longer required reaction. It required recognition. He looked at Claire first. "What happened today will be reviewed," he said calmly. "But what matters more is what you do with it tomorrow." Claire met his gaze, her posture steady, her voice clear. "It will not be ignored again," she said. Malik nodded once. That was enough. He turned slightly toward the staff. "You did not need to know who I was to do the right thing," he said. The sentence landed without force, but it carried weight that settled deep. Emily nodded quietly, her understanding already aligned with that truth. The others followed, not speaking, but present in a way that did not require words. Malik shifted his gaze across the room, taking in the guests who had remained, the witnesses who had become part of something larger than their original intent. "What you saw today," he continued, "should not be rare." The statement did not accuse. It did not dramatize. It simply stated what should have always been true. The man near the elevator nodded slowly. The woman who had recorded earlier lowered her phone completely. Her role now fully transitioned from observer to participant in a moment that had redefined expectation. Malik let the silence settle one last time. Not as tension, as closure. Then he spoke again, his voice calm, grounded, final. "Respect is not earned by status," he said. "It is proven by how you treat people before you know their status." The words did not echo. They stayed. Because they were not just a conclusion. They were a standard. Claire took a slow breath, her expression clear, her understanding complete. "We will carry that forward," she said. Malik gave a slight nod, not as approval, but as acknowledgement. The responsibility had shifted. It no longer sat with him alone. It extended to everyone in that space. Lisa stepped forward slightly. "Transition will be completed within the next 15 minutes, she said. Malik nodded. "Then my part here is done," he replied. There was no ceremony in the statement. No need for it. Because what had been accomplished did not require recognition. It required continuation. Malik turned toward the entrance, his steps measured, steady, the same way he had entered, but the space he moved through was no longer the same. The staff watched him go, not out of obligation, but out of understanding. The guests did the same, not because they were following a moment, but because they had witnessed something that would stay with them beyond this place. Claire remained where she was, her eyes following him briefly, then returning to the desk, to the space she now understood in a way she had not before. The system had changed, but more importantly, her perspective had, and that was where the real work would begin. Malik reached the glass doors and paused for just a second, not looking back, but aware of everything behind him. Then he stepped outside. The doors closed quietly, sealing the moment inside, but not containing it. Because what had happened in that lobby was no longer limited to that space. It had already begun to move beyond it, into conversations, into expectations, into the way people would measure similar moments in the future. Inside, the Harrington Grand continued to operate, but not as it had before. It operated with clarity, with awareness, with a standard that had been tested and reset in real time. And that was the difference. Not perfection, not image, truth. And as the day moved forward, one thing was certain. This was not the end of a story. It was the beginning of a new one, written not by what people assumed, but by what they chose to do when it mattered most.